I've read a lot of Haruki Murakami in the past 4 years, and there are a few moments in his novels that stick out to me. Somehow, several of his books have found me at the exact times I've needed them, so Murakami as an author feels sentimental to me. My favorite book of his is The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. I remember buying my copy at Barnes & Noble, reading the first 30 pages or so while my friend was shopping for jeans in American Eagle. Looking back, I probably looked really awkward standing there. Did you know that there are no benches in American Eagle? That day it was so busy, there was a line going 100 yards out the door, and I didn't want to leave my friend, so I stood there with her bags, reading The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. My absolute favorite part of The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, and the part I think about when I think about that book, is the section about 300 pages in. The main character is thinking about his first date with his wife, who recently left him for no reason. They go to an aquarium, and his wife can't stop looking at the jellyfish, and the narrator for no reason has an aversion to the jellyfish, but he tries not to let it get to him. Eventually he has to leave, and his wife, clueless to the jellyfish aversion, follows worried, asks him what's the matter. Describing it here, it seems meaningless, but reading it, one really gets hypnotized by the mundanity of it. There's a magic there. The magic in the mundane, the horror of feeling trapped by the mundane, is the main theme of his stories. He's funny and irreverent and uncomfortable and completely hypnotic. I think about that part of the book really whenever I think about love. I think that stems from the fact I was thinking about love a lot at that time, in a 15-year-old sort of way, and I made the connection. So much of his work is like that for me. Kafka on the Shore makes me think about high school, and Sputnik Sweetheart makes me think about all the rooms I've been in. I went into a lot of people's rooms while I was reading that one. Each book of his seemed to mean so much to me, and I was nervous about jumping into novelist as a vocation. Nervous not only because it seemed advertised like a self-help book, which I'm pretty diametrically opposed to, but also because it was possible it wouldn't mean as much to me as all his other books have meant to me. I read a shorter novel of his earlier this year, Colorless Tsuru Sasaki and His Years of Pilgrimage, and I really didn't connect with it at all. I don't know if it was because it wasn't one of his better works or I wasn't in the right headspace or what, but it just didn't work for me. Luckily, the case was different with novelist as a vocation. Before I talk in detail about the book itself, I'm sure you're wondering, what does this have to do with your mentorship? What are you doing for mentorship? What's going on? Let me answer these questions, please, and thank you. My goal for this class was and continues to be to deep dive only into my career interests, but my personal interests as well, focusing on how to balance the two in everyday life. I've been mentoring at a local middle school and researching teaching, and I've been working on making movies with Alex in this class, and I've been writing and reading as much as I can in between my responsibilities. Next semester, I plan to get a mentorship in political law while talking to philosophy professors at the collegiate level, while still focusing on my creative endeavors. I think when I'm trying to explain my mentorship, the reasoning behind everything I'm doing seems sort of inductive, like I'm coming up with the reasoning after reaching the conclusion. But to me, what I'm doing seems completely reasonable for no other reason than it's what I need to do. This is another reason why I was drawn to novelist as a vocation. In the introduction at the start of the republishing of Murakami's first two novellas, Wind/Pinball, Murakami writes about his origins as a novelist. While the first two novellas themselves are not very good, this introduction has stuck with me since I first read it. He didn't write his first novel until after he got a college degree, married his wife, and started a moderately successful jazz bar in Tokyo. He tells this story in the introduction, and again, novelist as a vocation, about how one day at a baseball game he suddenly decided to write a novel, so he wrote a novel. He was still running his bar and everything, so he wrote in the early hours of the morning after he got home at the kitchen table. This version of creativity to me carries a lot of meaning, this decisive creativity. My mom decided last year to learn how to paint, so she learned how to paint. These are two of her paintings, isn't that so cool? Novelist as a Vocation is a series of 12 essays including the foreword. Are novelists broad-minded? When I became a novelist? On literary prizes? On originality? So what should I write about? Making time your ally? On writing a novel? A completely personal and physical occupation? Regarding schools? What kind of characters should I include? And Going Abroad, a New Frontier. The really great thing about this collection is that all the essays start out very analytically, but become very personal. Each essay reads as a story, and so the book functions more as a memoir than a self-help book. Murakami explains in the foreword that he wrote these essays over the course of 5 years, starting in 2010, in between writing his novels, to try and contextualize his career as a writer. I'd like to go through some highlights and speak through my thoughts on them. The foreword expertly defines his goals in writing the novel, and it's exciting to realize while you're reading that this book is a book that Murakami wrote without an audience in mind. I think there's a certain energy that comes from that, writing for oneself, and you can feel it in this book. You can also feel Murakami's age throughout. He was pushing 70 while writing this novel, and sometimes it does feel like it's rambling and meandering. In the foreword, he explains that he has no idea if the novel will work, and that he's basically an ordinary person, and that he can just write novels. This feeling carries through the story, and I do think there's some frustration that comes with it. Reading novelists as a vocation sometimes feels like talking to an older jazz player that's really great at what they do, but they can't quite articulate why. So they end up talking about jazz for however long, never really getting to a conclusion. While this is true throughout the novel, there's still plenty of charm and insight that makes it feel worthwhile to read. Murakami feels a lot of connection to jazz, and explains several times throughout the novel that he wants his books to feel like listening to jazz. Apart from that being a pretty wholly pretentious thing to say, it does ring true in the way that he writes. In his novel, he talks about writing without an outline or a plan, and seeing where these ideas and characters take him, even if that place is weird and uncomfortable. He talks about this the most in the chapter on originality, where he goes through the different great musicians and authors and tries to explain why they felt so fresh to him and the audiences that responded to them. Again, kind of like an old jazz musician that doesn't understand exactly what makes them so great. He talks about Thelonious Monk and the Beatles without a lot of depth, but still with a lot of heart in a way that feels very captivating. It's moments like these that give the book a lot of heart and that attract me to Murakami in the first place. In a lot of his novels, he'll take you on this long, winding story about something completely horrifying or absurd or stupid, and a lot of the humanity comes from these particular moments. In Kafka on the Shore, you get through these exhausting few chapters and you're crying. Then Kafka tomorrow talks for a page about how he really likes the album Kid A by Radiohead. So What Should I Write About is a perfect example of this inductive reasoning I'm talking about. What I mean is, Murakami is trying to understand a general axiom for how he comes up with stories by starting at the conclusion that he can just write novels. With this, he expands out, saying that one needs to read tons of novels, but he also explains that he doesn't really know how he does it, that one just has to do it. My favorite part in this chapter is when he's talking about his first novella, Hear the Wind Sing. I've mentioned reading this one, but I'd like to talk about it more. It's his only story of which I remember nothing about, but while that's true, I still remember exactly how it made me feel, and the general impression I got from the novel. In Murakami's own words, it's a story about having nothing to write about, growing from that original idea. He explains at the end of the chapter that the best part of writing is putting the gears in motion, when you finally practiced enough to be able to put the pieces together of any story in a way that's compelling and interesting. This is how certain stories about nothing can be so compelling, and why certain stories that should be exciting sometimes fall flat. I think it's true that if someone doesn't have a certain aesthetic vision, their art is more likely to fall flat. Not that I'm one to judge. Murakami explains in a completely personal and physical occupation, one of my favorite sections in the novel, that novelists don't write novels because someone asks them to. They write because they have a personal desire to write. This has been a meaningful idea to me since I've read it. This month in November, I attempted to write a big old novel. I ended up giving up. It's so weird because for the past I don't know how long, I've been a pretty avid writer, so why was it so hard for me to read with this goal? I think it's because I didn't really want to write any particular novel. I had some ideas, but there wasn't any story I was dying to tell or anything. I write so much and so easily when I have things I want to say, but when I have to say them, when I have to have something to say, I freeze up and become disinterested. After deciding that I didn't have to reach my goal, I started writing a lot more. That Word document is super long at this point, and it feels good to write what I feel I need to without any expectation of what it's going to be. This chapter in the book is all about the physicality required to write a novel. Not only does novel writing require a lot of focus, it also requires a certain physicality. Murakami has another novel called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running that speaks of this idea at more length. Murakami believes that one needs to be physically healthy to write a novel because sitting at a desk in front of a computer for however long every day is a difficult thing to do. Murakami runs a marathon every year and wakes up at 5 a.m. every morning to run 5 miles. He talks about how the process of running is a lot like the process of writing. I'm not a runner, obviously, but I like this idea a lot. When talking about successful novelists that really do it over and over again, He explains that to him it's less of a defined, careful art and more of something that you just have to do. A lot of people know how to write, so the issue is building the endurance and focus to actually write a novel from nothing. What kind of characters should I include is another interesting chapter regarding obviously what characters Murakami includes in his novel. It's a chapter that feels almost like a writer's help book, but it skirts the line enough to be enjoyable. He talks about all the people he's met through his pre-author career and speaks to how much of his personal life he puts into his work. He explains how nervous he was putting characters based on real people into his novels, before finding that no one really noticed. This chapter is charming. Murakami is a very private person, and one of my favorite parts of a work like this is being able to learn more about him as a person through more of his work. It's not even books about writing specifically that I'm adverse to. It's the whole genre of books about how to own your day or say fuck it, with the F word plastered on the cover like it's trying to be rebellious, punk, anti-establishment. Even though when you open it, most of the advice is pretty common, like get enough sleep, exercise, and whatever else. I think it's immoral on basically every level to commodify self-help, especially when it's self-help that's so self-aggrandizing to make the consumer feel, on some level, like they're really something else. Walking out of Barnes & Noble with this big yellow book that says, F you, I'm improving myself, I'm really bettering myself, as 100,000 people walk out of the same Barnes & Noble with the same book, thinking about the same things. I guess it's not a hatred for the genre, and more of a frustration with the fact that no matter how singular and rebellious a book or piece of art is, if it's commodified and if it's sold on a scale that so many people can see it, it becomes whatever the consumer makes of it, in a way that makes the artists themselves become consumable as well, and it actually becomes the establishment. I'm not saying that self-help books are punk, obviously, and I actually think a lot of my frustration from those books specifically comes from the fact that they feel exploitative not only of the aesthetic that they're often trying to profit off of, but also of people's own health and well-being. It's good if someone buys one of these books and it actually improves a life, but it scares me that anything that personal can be commodified like that. Every time I see one of those books, it makes me think of that scene in Magnolia, where Tom Cruise is leading a seminar for aspiring pickup artists. Why are we commodifying things like this? It makes me uncomfortable, that idea that art can become so widespread that it stops becoming art and starts becoming a commodity, where there's a specific accepted analysis, and one even starts to consume the creator involved. There's a theory called death of the author, first explained in an essay of the same name by Roland Barthes, that theorizes that the meaning of any given work of art does not come from the artist's intention, but from the consumer's interpretation. I disagree with the essay because it limits the function of art and isolates it to just the consumer's own ideas. I believe that it's impossible to disengage art with an artist, and I also believe that artists themselves have become a commodity that the consumer can superimpose onto a work of art to create more meaning, or the right meaning, or a more valid meaning. I think both can be true, that an artist is inexorably tied to their art, and that a consumer is free to find whatever meaning they want in art. It depends on what one is trying to extract from art, not that there's a specific axiom of analysis when it comes to art. One can't just decide, I'm going to look at this story from a purely analytical and historical perspective, and then completely disregard how the story makes them feel because they decided to focus on the author's intentions. The opposite is true too. There was an article published in Vanity Fair recently about Cormac McCarthy's relationship with a 16-year-old he met at 47 and how it affected his novels. The article is frustrating because it glamorizes and glorifies an author, uncritically accepting the inappropriate nature of their relationship. While it's obviously a heinous relationship with a clear power imbalance, this does not have to stop one from reading McCarthy's novels. It just means that the context in which the novels are read will be different. Obviously, the plot of No Country for Old Men, in which an older man fights through Texas to find a 16-year-old wife, will be perceived differently after the news has come out. If one analyzes his works with an axiom that follows death of the author, then one does not have to grapple with the fact that on some level it's clear McCarthy put this uncomfortable part of himself into his work. Both can be true at the same time. This art means something to me, this art makes me uncomfortable. As I said at the start of the script, Murakami's story of how he became a writer really spoke to me. This is where I really connect my reading of this book with my mentorship experience as a whole. His decision, clear and determined to write, was impressive to me and important for me to read about, but even more so, the fact that he did it without any expectation of payment or reward, while he was still working a job. I guess I have this idea of adult work, that I'm going to reach a certain point and have a career and a place I need to pay for and all my own bills, things like that. And I can't really imagine myself balancing that in my own creative whatever. I think it's important to me right now to have enough time to create and really dive into whatever I'm reading or watching. And it's so scary that this is probably the least busy time of my life because already I struggle to give myself time for things I get really excited about. This class was a wake-up call for me that I was already interacting in some way with the adult world, learning about different careers, one of which I'll probably find myself interacting with professionally in the future. Whether it be teaching or law, it's important to me that I'm able to work while still creating things I'm excited about. I went into this class with that idea at the forefront of my mind. And I'm glad to say that through this class, I've been able to interact with more actively and with more encouragement the things I'm passionate about. I'm not sure really whether that's a function specifically of this class or of this weird crisis I've come to this past summer and my starting senior year thereafter. But there's a tangible difference in what I used to be reading and writing and watching and making, and what I'm doing now. I read novelist as a vocation mostly to try and get more insight into the story Murakami tells about his first novels, running at this kitchen table with no real plan in mind, except for the plan to create. What this book ended up making me think about is this: what happens after? Reading a book written by anyone feels so personal, and sometimes, depending on the author, it's uncomfortable to be let in like that. Murakami's novels feel like that to me, as do novels like Slaughterhouse-Five, As I Lay Dying, or Kindred. I think a large reason why these novels are so great is how personally they treat their subject matter and the setting in which they take place. Slaughterhouse-Five is about Kurt Vonnegut's real time in World War II and the trauma that time caused. As I Lay Dying is a story not only of a dying mother, but also of a dying South. You can feel the ghosts haunting that story as they haunted Faulkner. Kindred is not only an excellent speculative fiction novel about time travel, but a very personal struggle by Octavia Butler, grappling with the legacy of slavery in the antebellum South of America. Reading all these novels, there's this interesting dissonance between how personal they are and the fact that they were written expressly for a commercial audience. How do these authors show every ugly inch of themselves and the history they've been affected by, with the knowledge that this art will be widely read? I think this is the reason why I'm not focusing completely on creative writing, but also why I'm so focused on the idea in the first place. And this is also something that confounds me about Murakami's story. His first novella is unstructured, slow, and so completely personal. Why did he send it into a magazine competition? Was the original goal for his work to be read? And reading all he's written about it, it doesn't seem like that's the case at all. I guess the part for me that's been hardest to grapple with is the idea that I can create whatever I want just for the sake of creating. It's impossible for me to imagine letting people in like that, widely enough that people who don't know me are consuming what I'm making. Also, I think I'd be sad if I didn't become a teacher, because I was focused on writing. I don't want to spend the rest of my life trying to look inward and finding new things to explore and tear apart, so maybe someday I'll start making money off my own discomfort. I want to have a healthy work-life balance. That's the end of the video. Haruki Murakami's Novelist as a Vocation taught me the importance of a good work-life balance.